In the heart of Nigeria, a jealous prince locked the queen inside her own palace. But what happens next will shock you. Before we begin this powerful story of courage and loyalty, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The golden sun poured over the sprawling city of Abuzo, where the marble walls of the royal palace gleamed like molten gold under the afternoon sky. The sound of drums and distant laughter filled the air, and the scent of hibiscus drifted through the courtyards. Inside those shining gates lived Queen Amara, the most beloved woman in all of Nigeria. She was known not for her jewels or her crown, but for her heart, a heart that beat for her people. Her days were spent among the children of the market, feeding the hungry and sitting beside the farmers when the harvest was done. But within the bright walls of her kingdom, jealousy had begun to breathe. Her husband's younger brother, Prince Dako, stood at the edge of every ceremony, his smile wide but his heart dark. He was a man who believed he deserved the throne, and he despised the love that Amara received from both the king and the people. Day after day, his envy grew stronger, twisting like a vine inside his chest. He would watch her from the balcony, her emerald dress swaying in the sunlight as she greeted her people, and his thoughts turned colder, more dangerous. And so, as the sun blazed high one silent afternoon, Prince Dako decided that it was time to strike. The opportunity came when King Oba Adwale, the ruler of Abuzo, left the palace to visit the border towns with his guards and advisors. The queen stayed behind to oversee the harvest festival, a time of joy and unity when the city shone brightest. But behind that celebration, Dako saw his chance. He whispered lies into the ears of a few loyal guards, men whose loyalty could be bought with gold and power. He told them that the queen was plotting to take the throne, that she planned to poison the king upon his return. The guards hesitated at first. Amara's kindness was known to all. But Dako's words were soaked in authority, and fear makes men do foolish things. That same afternoon, when the queen stood in the courtyard greeting the farmers, she noticed the sudden silence, the sound of feet, heavy and hesitant, echoing on the marble. She turned, her calm eyes meeting the faces of her own soldiers, but their hands were trembling, their eyes lowered. Then came Dako's voice, cold, smooth, and cruel. By the order of the royal council, he said, "You are accused of treason." The words hit her like a storm. The people gasped, the drums stopped, and as the queen stood in the golden sunlight, surrounded by her own guards, she realized that her kindness had blinded her to the enemy within her own bloodline. They locked her inside her private chambers, the same room that once smelled of jasmine and laughter, now sealed like a prison. The bright curtains still swayed with the wind, but the air felt heavy, suffocating. Outside her door, Dako gave orders to keep her isolated, to spread whispers across the city that she had betrayed the crown. And just like that, a kingdom that once sang her name fell silent. But among the many who served her, there was one who refused to believe those lies. Tari, a 16-year-old maid who had grown up under Amara's care, could not sleep that night. She remembered the queen feeding her when she was a hungry child, teaching her to read under the old baobab tree, smiling even when storms came. Tari was poor, unnoticed, and small, but her heart burned with loyalty. She stood in the servants' quarters, staring at the distant glow of the queen's window, and she knew that doing nothing was not an option. The next afternoon, when the palace courtyard glimmered under the sun, Tari began her quiet rebellion. She slipped into the storage room, took an old cloth, and disguised herself as a trader woman. With a bag of dried herbs and fruits, she walked past the palace gates, her head lowered, her steps trembling, but her mind clear as fire. The guards barely looked at her. To them, she was just another face. But Tari's heart pounded with purpose. She wasn't running away. She was going to find the king and bring him home. And under that blinding Nigerian sun, a servant girl became something greater, the silent spark of courage that would soon change the fate of a kingdom. The blazing afternoon sun poured its heat across the dry plains as Tari walked farther and farther from the gates of the Golden Palace. Dust clung to her feet, and the air shimmered with heat. She had never left Abuso before. Her entire life had been spent sweeping the marble floors and serving water in shining goblets. But now, every step she took was a step toward saving the woman who had once saved her. Around her, the marketplace was bursting with color and chaos. Traders shouting, goats bleating, baskets filled with mangoes and cassava roots spilling over onto the ground. Yet, despite all the life around her, Tari felt alone. She dared not speak to anyone. She kept her head low, afraid that one wrong glance would reveal who she truly was. She could still hear the echo of Dako's lies in her mind, the cruel words that turned the queen into a prisoner. Her throat tightened with anger, but she pushed it down. Anger could not save the queen. Only courage could. With her small bundle of food and a piece of cloth tied around her head, she stepped onto the long road that led beyond Abuso, toward the villages where the king was said to be visiting. The sky was cloudless, the earth cracked beneath her sandals, but her heart, fragile as it was, refused to break. As the day stretched on, she walked through fields where farmers bent low under the weight of their harvests. Some looked up at her with quiet curiosity, a young girl, alone, walking the king's road in broad daylight. One old farmer, his hands rough and dark from years of work, called out to her, "Where are you headed, child? The sun is not kind today." Tari hesitated. The world outside the palace was kinder than she had expected, but she could not trust easily. She smiled faintly and said, "To the next town, sir. I have herbs to sell." The old man nodded, offered her a drink from his clay pot, and went back to his work. That small gesture, a stranger's kindness, gave her strength. The queen had always told her that goodness is not rare, only unseen. So she kept walking, her bare feet burning, but her spirit unshaken. When the sun reached its highest point, she stopped beneath a baobab tree to rest. She looked at the horizon, endless and golden, and whispered softly, "Hold on, my queen. I'm coming." Those words were carried by the wind, as if the earth itself was listening. She didn't know that far away, in the palace, Queen Amara sat by the barred window, whispering the same prayer, that someone, anyone, would believe her innocence. By the time Tari reached the outskirts of Egbu, the first of the border towns, her body ached from exhaustion. She hadn't eaten since morning, her throat was dry, and her hands trembled as she clutched her small bag. The village was alive with trade, women pounding yam, men calling out the price of fabrics, children running through the dust with laughter that sounded like bells. She moved through the crowd, asking quietly if anyone had seen the king's convoy. Most people shook their heads, some ignored her, but one guard at the town's entrance overheard her question. He was tall, with a scar across his cheek and a heavy spear in his hand. "You seek the king?" he asked. His tone was sharp, suspicious. Why would a traitor girl want to find him? Tari's breath caught. For a moment, she panicked, but she remembered the queen's voice, steady, graceful, always composed even in fear. So she lowered her gaze and said, "My family's land was taken by Prince Dako's men. I need to beg the king for justice." The guard studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "He rides north toward the river villages. If you walk fast, you might catch him by tomorrow." Tari thanked him, relief washing over her like cool water. But as she turned to leave, she didn't see the pair of eyes watching her from the crowd. A man dressed in royal colors, one of Dako's spies. He recognized her instantly, though her clothes were plain. The spy smiled to himself and whispered to another man nearby, "The little maid runs to the king. Prince Dako must know of this." That evening, the air turned softer, golden light spilling across the tall grasses as the day began to cool. Tari walked faster now, her feet bleeding slightly, her dress torn from the thorns along the path. The sound of crickets filled the air, and the smell of roasted maize from a distant fire made her stomach ache with hunger. But she refused to stop. Every memory of the queen, her laughter, her kindness, her trust, kept pushing her forward. She imagined the queen sitting alone in that silent palace, betrayed by her own family, waiting for a miracle that may never come. Tari had no sword, no army, no title, only faith. But faith, when pure, can move mountains. As she walked through the tall savanna grass, the sound of hooves echoed faintly in the distance. She froze. For a moment, fear gripped her heart. Was it bandits or soldiers sent by Dako? She crouched low behind a fallen log, her heart pounding like a drum. Slowly, through the shimmer of heat, she saw them, riders in the king's royal colors, their armor gleaming beneath the afternoon sun. Her eyes widened. The king's convoy. Tears welled up, and she almost laughed in disbelief. After miles of walking, after burning her feet and hiding from spies, she had finally reached him. Gathering her courage, she ran toward the road, waving her arms, shouting through the wind, my king, please hear me." The horses stopped. Dust rose in swirls around them. The soldiers pointed their spears toward her, their voices sharp. But then, from behind them, came a calm and deep voice, one she had heard only from afar in ceremonies. It was King Oba Adwale himself, his eyes steady and curious. "Who are you, child?" he asked, stepping down from his horse. Tari dropped to her knees, tears mixing with dust, and whispered, "My king, they have trapped the queen." For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. The wind carried only the rustle of dry grass and the distant call of birds. King Oba Adewale stood tall before the trembling girl, his royal robes brushing against the dust, his sharp eyes fixed on her face. He could tell she wasn't just a wandering trader. There was fire and fear in her voice, the kind that only truth can carry. "Speak," he said firmly, his tone calm but commanding. "What do you mean the queen is trapped?" Tari lifted her face, her cheeks streaked with dust and tears. Her voice shook as she spoke, but her words came clear and fierce. "Your Majesty," she began, "it was your brother, Prince Dako. He has locked the queen inside her chambers. He said she betrayed you, but it's a lie. He told the guards you would die if you returned. He wants your throne." The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged worried glances. Others frowned in disbelief. But the king didn't move. He stared at Tari, every word echoing through his mind like a thunderclap. His brother, his own blood. Could Dako be capable of such treachery? Adewale took a slow breath, his jaw tightening as realization began to take shape. He had seen the jealousy in Dako's eyes before, subtle, hidden behind smiles at royal feasts. He had ignored it, believing time and love would soften his brother's heart. But now, hearing this young maid's trembling voice, he felt the full weight of his mistake. He turned to his captain, General Abney, a strong woman who had fought beside him for years. "How long since we left Abuso?" he asked. 3 days, my king," she replied. "Then we ride tonight," Adewale said. "If what this girl says is true, the queen is in danger." Tari looked up, her eyes wide. "Please, your majesty, hurry. He has spread lies across the palace. Even the guards believe her guilty." The king's expression hardened, but his voice softened when he looked at her again. "You are brave to have come all this way," he said quietly. "What is your name?" "Tari," she whispered. "I'm only a maid." The king smiled faintly, a sad, grateful smile. "Not anymore," he said. "You are the reason truth found its way to me." He gestured to his soldiers. "Give her water and a place to ride." We returned to Abuso, and with that, under the blazing orange light of the afternoon sun, the royal convoy turned south. The sound of hooves thundered across the land, carrying with them the storm that would soon break upon the Golden Palace. Back in Abuso, the palace that once rang with music had turned silent and cold. Prince Dako sat upon the marble throne, his posture straight, his smile thin and poisonous. Around him stood the council members, some uncertain, others fearful. "The queen will remain confined until the king returns," Dako declared, his tone measured, "for the safety of the kingdom." But in truth, his heart was restless. He had received word from one of his spies that a servant girl, Tari, had escaped the palace. He had sent men to follow her, but they hadn't returned. That silence was his only fear. Still, He told himself that no one would believe a mere servant. The sun poured through the open windows, glinting off the gold-inlaid floors. The brightness mocked him. He thought he had everything: power, control, silence. But the palace air was shifting. Servants whispered in corners, guards avoided his gaze, and the queen, though imprisoned, refused to bow. Inside her chamber, Queen Amara sat by the window, her hands clasped, her eyes calm. She had not cried once since her arrest. There was sadness in her heart, yes, but also faith that truth could not stay buried under lies forever. She often whispered to herself, "The sun always rises, even after the darkest hour." And so, she waited, graceful, unbroken, and strong. By the time the king's convoy reached the outskirts of Abuso, the heat had begun to fade, replaced by the deep glow of late afternoon light. Dust clouded the air as the horses galloped toward the palace gates. The guards at the entrance froze at the sight. The king, unexpected, furious, his eyes burning like fire. "Open the gates," General Abney shouted. The massive wooden doors creaked open, and the king rode in without pause. Courtiers scattered, servants gasped, and the sound of hooves echoed through the courtyard. Prince Daco, seated in the great hall, turned pale when he heard the commotion. He rose quickly, adjusting his robes, his mind racing. When Adwale stepped into the hall, silence fell over the room like a shroud. "Brother," Daco began, forcing a smile, "you returned sooner than we expected." The king didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer, his boots echoing on the marble. "You have taken my throne," he said quietly, "and locked away my queen." Daco's mask slipped. "She plotted against you," he snapped. "I did what was necessary." But Adewale's voice rose, sharp and thunderous. "Enough!" The word echoed through the hall, shaking even the guards. "I have heard the truth, from a girl with more courage than any man in this court." Daco's eyes widened. He knew then that his plan had crumbled. The king turned to the soldiers. "Bring the queen." Moments later, the chamber doors opened, and there she was, Queen Amara, walking slowly into the hall, her green gown dusty but her head held high. The afternoon light flooded the room, falling on her face like a blessing. She looked at her husband, and for the first time in days, her eyes filled with relief. When the queen stood beside him, the king reached for her hand, his expression softening. "Forgive me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should never have left you unguarded." The queen shook her head gently. "You trusted your brother. That is not your sin, my king. It is his." Her voice carried across the hall, calm, strong, unwavering. Daco fell to his knees, desperation spilling from him now. "Brother, please. I did it for the kingdom. I feared her influence. You feared her light," Adewale interrupted, "because it made your darkness visible." The words struck like thunder. The court fell silent, the tension so thick that even the air seemed to hold its breath. Tari stood in the corner, barely visible among the soldiers, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She had done it. She had saved her queen. The king turned toward her, his voice softer now, filled with gratitude. "Come forward, Tari." She hesitated, then stepped into the light. The king looked at her and said, "You walked through fire for truth. You risked your life for loyalty. You are no longer a servant. You are a guardian of this kingdom." The hall erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the palace walls. And as the golden sun poured through the open windows, Tari, the humble maid, stood tall, no longer hidden in the shadows, but shining in the light she had fought so bravely to protect. The courtyard of the palace was glowing in the golden afternoon light, and yet an eerie stillness hung in the air. Akin stood before his father, his heart pounding, but his eyes steady. King Alumo looked older that day, his once proud face marked with deep lines of disappointment and grief. Around them, servants whispered, guards shifted uneasily, and the sounds of the bustling marketplace outside the palace walls seemed like echoes from another world. The rumors had spread. Akin, the prince who dared to trade mercy for ambition, had betrayed the very blood that raised him. But what the people didn't know was that Akin had been manipulated, twisted by lies whispered by General Ade, who wanted the throne for himself. When the king finally spoke, his voice was low but heavy. "Akin, my son, why?" The question struck harder than any sword. The prince's throat tightened. "Father," he said, his voice trembling, "I wanted to protect our land. Ade told me the deal was to save our people." The king turned away, his cloak shimmering in the light. "And what did your ambition save?" "Nothing but his greed." His words carried the weight of heartbreak, not rage, and that broke Akin more than any punishment could. Outside the walls, the kingdom trembled with unrest. Villagers gathered in small groups, their faces painted with confusion and fear. The golden fields of Amara, once full of laughter, were now silent. The workers had left their tools behind to listen to the whispers traveling like wildfire. "The prince betrayed the king," they said. "The army is divided." In the midst of that chaos, one figure moved with purpose. Ao, Akin's childhood friend and now captain of the royal guard. His armor shone under the afternoon sun as he rode toward the palace, his jaw tight, his eyes filled with a storm of emotions. He had fought beside Akin in battles, bled beside him, and now he was ordered to arrest him. But how does a brother arrest his brother? When he entered the courtyard, the king nodded silently, and Ao understood. He approached Akin slowly. Their eyes met, years of shared dreams flashing between them. Akin's lips parted, but before words could escape, Ao placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "I'll bring you back from this, even if it means losing everything." The prince's eyes welled with tears, but he didn't resist. That night, the truth began to unravel. Ao found a letter hidden in the general's quarters, an official seal of Zaruba, the rival kingdom, offering Ade wealth and land in exchange for Akin's downfall. The realization hit Ao like lightning. It wasn't Akin who betrayed the crown, it was Ade. He rushed back to the palace, his boots pounding the marble halls, his heart racing. The king was in council, his ministers murmuring about punishment and disgrace. Ao stormed in, holding the letter high. "Your Majesty, the real traitor stands among us," he shouted. The council gasped as Ade turned pale, his composure shattering. "Lies!" The general spat, but his voice cracked. The king took the letter, his eyes scanning the seal, and for a long, heavy moment, the world held its breath. Then his face hardened. "Guards," he said quietly, "arrest him." The soldiers hesitated. Ade was feared, not just obeyed. But when Ao stepped forward, his voice rang with authority. "You will obey your king." Slowly, the guards moved, seizing the general, who thrashed and cursed until he was dragged away. The council sat in stunned silence. The truth had come out, but the damage had already cut deep. The king turned to Akin, whose head was bowed in shame. "You were deceived," he said softly. "But still, you must rebuild what your trust destroyed." Akin nodded silently, tears rolling down his cheeks. The next morning, the sun rose brighter than ever before, bathing the palace in gold. Akin stood before the gates, watching the people gather once again. The rumors had changed, the truth had spread. The same villagers who had cursed his name now watched him with mixed feelings of pity and respect. The prince walked down the marble steps, not with the pride of royalty, but with the humility of one who had learned what true strength means. He spoke to the people in a voice steady yet full of emotion. "I was blinded by lies, but I will not let deceit rule over us again. I will fight, not for power, but for every man, woman, and child who calls this land home." His words carried across the crowd like a warm wind, and for the first time in many moons, the people cheered not for a prince, but for a man who had found redemption. Behind him, King Alumo stood tall, pride returning to his weary eyes. As the drums of unity echoed across Amara, the golden banners of the kingdom fluttered high under the afternoon sky, and the lesson of betrayal turned into the dawn of forgiveness. The afternoon sun stood high above the golden rooftops of Amara as the drums of unity faded into the distance. The courtyard that had once witnessed betrayal now shimmered with the light of forgiveness. Akin stood beside his father, King Alyamo, overlooking the vast sea of people who had gathered from every corner of the kingdom. Farmers, soldiers, mothers, and children all stood together, their faces painted with a fragile hope. The scent of fresh palm wine mixed with the dust of the earth as the king raised his hand for silence. "My people," he began, his voice steady but warm, "our land has seen shadows darker than clouds, but today the light returns. We have learned that trust can be broken, but also rebuilt." He turned to Akin, his gaze softening. "A prince once deceived now stands before you as a man who has seen the cost of ambition and the value of truth." The crowd murmured, their eyes fixed on a young prince whose face carried both guilt and determination. Akin stepped forward, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He looked at the people, the same people who had once turned their backs on him, and said, "I cannot change what has been done, but I can dedicate every breath of my life to heal what was broken." His voice trembled, but every word struck deep into the hearts of those listening. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was sincere, rising like a wave of forgiveness that washed over the palace grounds. Days turned into weeks, and the change in Amara was visible. Under Akin's guidance, the walls of division began to crumble. He visited the farmers whose crops had withered during the conflict, kneeling beside them in the fields under the blazing sun. "We will rebuild these lands together," he told them, his hands covered in the same soil that once grew their pride. The farmers watched in awe as their prince, once distant behind palace gates, now worked beside them, planting seeds with bare hands. Markets reopened, laughter returned to the streets, and music once again flowed through the alleys. But amid the joy, Akin carried a quiet burden. The image of General Adwale being dragged away still haunted him. He had learned that evil doesn't always wear a monster's face. Sometimes it hides behind loyalty and friendship. One afternoon, as he stood at the edge of the river where the kingdom drew its life, Ao joined him. "You've done well, brother," Ao said, placing a hand on Akin's shoulder. "The people see your heart now." Akin smiled faintly. "I only wish I had seen clearer before the storm." Ao looked out at the sunlight dancing on the water and replied, "Sometimes the storm is what opens our eyes." Their silence afterward was peaceful, two men bound not by rank, but by shared pain and redemption. Months later, the kingdom celebrated the Festival of Renewal, a day marking the rebirth of Amara's unity. Bright fabrics fluttered across the palace walls, golden drums echoed through the city, and the scent of roasted yam filled the air. King Alyamo sat proudly on his throne, his once weary eyes now full of light. When Akin entered the hall, the crowd parted, bowing in respect. The king rose and held up a ceremonial spear, a symbol of leadership passed down through generations. "Today," he announced, "we do not honor a prince for his birthright, but for his courage to face his own heart." He handed the spear to Akin, who knelt before him. "Rise, my son," the king said softly, "and rule not with pride, but with empathy." As Akin rose, cheers thundered through the hall, echoing beyond the palace gates into the fields, the villages, and the hearts of every soul in Amara. Outside, the sunlight spilled over the golden palace, illuminating everything it touched, the symbol of a new beginning. Akin looked up, his eyes glistening, and whispered to himself, "The throne is not power, it's responsibility." The golden afternoon light wrapped around him like a promise, and as the drums of celebration grew louder, the once-fallen prince became the kingdom's greatest hope, a living reminder that redemption is not found in royal blood, but in the courage to change.